Hello class, this is Mr. Goyette with National University Academy, going over with you some questions you'll find on the World History B final exam and the information you'll need to complete the discussions and a working class we'll be doing over the last week. I'm going to kick it off. We're going to go back to basically where the midterm brought you, so it's not entirely cumulative for the whole course, but it will go over basically units 4 through 8. We're going to go back and look at the connection between militarism and imperialism. Of course, you can review this on page 773. As a country gains colonies, its military grows to protect them, and this is a link between militarism and imperialism at the time. One event in Sarajevo ignited the Great War, World War I. Remember, you can review this on page 844 of your text. That's the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie. This happened on June 28, 1914. What was trench warfare intended to accomplish? That it was to protect soldiers from enemy gunfire on the front lines. You can review that on page 847 of your text. The impact of the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk was on what was the effect of it on Germany? Basically, it allowed Germany to focus all of their efforts on the Western Front. What was the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk? It was the moment when the Russians, because of the Bolshevik Revolution, signed a treaty with the Germans to no longer partake in World War I. This allowed the Germans to focus more on not fighting on two fronts. How did the Allies respond to Wilson's vision for peace? Basically, Britain and France showed little sign of agreeing with Wilson. Britain and France were concerned with strengthening their own security, and Britain and France also wanted to strip Germany of its war-making powers. The text reminds you that at this time, President Woodrow Wilson disagreed highly with what France and Britain were doing in punishing the Germans. Just this week, I've heard repeated more than once, I think it was Glenn Beck, got his history completely upside down. He was saying that it might have been that Liberty and Tyranny guy, Levine. They had everything reversed. They said that Woodrow Wilson was trying to punish Germany, and it was his softening of the British Navy and all this that was his agenda. Actually, that's not accurate. They could probably benefit from picking up a history book. Wilson actually had a stroke trying to convince, while he was there, trying to convince the British and the French to not punish Germany so unevenly after the war, because while the Germans were not the original catalyst of the war, they had been a big part of it. They were not the only reason for it, so to punish them out of hand, in Wilson's view, was a big mistake. It was Clemenceau who was the one who really wanted to punish the French Prime Minister, who wanted to punish the Germans. How did life change for the Russians after the success of the Bolshevik Revolution? Russia was organized into several self-governing republics after this time. The Japanese peasants aligned themselves with the communists rather than the nationalists because they were looking for handouts. Mostly, they wanted the aristocrats and the landowners and all the landlords to turn over their riches to the peasants, to the poor. The communists promised dividing land among the farmers, while the nationalists ignored their problems. You can review this on page 884. Jiang Jieshi, or Shanghai Shek, his party was mostly bankers and business people. What event in 1937 halted the Chinese War? Again, this is Jiang and Mao. What led to a truce because the Japanese launched an all-out invasion of China. You can review this on page 886. This is because World War II is beginning. So Japan's trying to extend into its empire into Manchuria and other parts of China. So Mao and Shanghai Shek or Jiang Jieshi are going to say, hold on for a second, let's not fight internally and fight our imperialist enemy. What influences created an environment of nationalism in Southeast Asia or Southwest Asia? The breakup of the Ottoman Empire and Western interests in the region. It's on page 890 of your textbook. In which country did nationalists lead a successful rebellion against the Sultan and then reform the government with an emphasis on moderation? This was in Turkey. You'll review the section on Kemal. That's also on page 890. Why did coalition governments usually prove unstable? If you have so many alliances with several parties who disregard each other's policies, you have a little bit of chaos. So what happens with coalition governments is everybody's trying to make rules that they can all live by, and it ends up leading to disarray. So there were alliances of several parties who disagreed on many policies. What fear added to the appeal of fascism in Italy and Germany? You'll notice that Mussolini's black shirts, one of the first things they did was go after the socialists. Basically, they feared the communist revolution in Russia. And I know I'd mentioned the First They Came poem last week, but let's read it and you'll see why Niemöller was fearing the Nazis and Mussolini's black shirts. Now, the author of this poem, Niemöller, was actually part of the Protestant Reich Church. The Confessionist Church was part of the Nazi Christian Church. He then went away from it because he realized that it was on basically a death squad of killing anything in the culture that Hitler didn't like. So he left the Reich Church and started his own church against the Nazis. He wrote the following poem, and I want you to, this is another thing that a lot in history that people tend to overlook, especially in the United States, because of our emphasis on communists always being the bad guy or the socialists always being the bad guy. The Nazis, of course, were a socialist workers' party, but listen to this poem nonetheless. When the Nazis came for the communists, I remained silent. I was not a communist. I'm not doing anything. Then they locked up the Social Democrats. I remained silent. I was not a Social Democrat. Then they came for the trade unionists. I did not protest. I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews. I did not speak out. I was not a Jew. When they came for me, there was no one left to speak out for me. So this, of course, is about the Holocaust. And the first people they target were the socialists and eventually the Jews. Continuing on, so that was Martin Niemöller. You can review this information on page 911, Mussolini's black shirts. The Munich Conference came to symbolize the dangers of appeasement. Chamberlain's intention to preserve peace after the Munich Conference, he comes back and he says, he proclaimed this proudly, I believe it is peace in our time, he says. Well, all he successfully did was encourage Hitler to keep taking land and to march forward, because it was Hitler's belief that the French and the British would do nothing to stop him, and so he went into Poland. On that subject, let's see, why did Britain and France declare war on Germany after they invaded Poland? They had promised to uphold the independence of Poland. In what way was Japan different from its allies, Germany and Italy? It was ruled by militarists who kept the emperor in power. Look on page 915. Hirohito was kept in power, and the extreme nationalists just borrowed the badge of the emperor, and turned it into this extreme nationalist group looking for empire. I'm going to pause here. I'll come back with you for more review on World History B, getting you ready for the final. Talk to you soon now.